Welcome to this week's reading on the Classic Ghost Stories podcast. The Haunted Spinney by Elliott O'Donnell was first published in 1904. Now, O'Donnell was an author who often blurred the lines between ghost story and alleged fact. This tale unfolds in a foreboding woodland following a man's bizarre discovery and its haunting aftermath. What subtle ghosts lurk hidden beneath the twisted trees? This is a story where truth and imagination, madness and hauntings are not easily disentangled. So join me, Tony Walker, narrator of the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, for this week's story.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody comes back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
The Haunted Spinney by Elliott O'Donnell, published in 1905. It was a cold night. Rain had been falling steadily, not only for hours but days. The ground was saturated. As I walked along the country lane, the slush splashed over my boots and trousers. To my left was a huge stone wall, behind which I could see the nodding heads of firs, and through them the wind was rushing, making a curious whistling sound, now loud, now soft, roaring and gently murmuring. The sound fascinated me. I fancied it might be the angry voice of a man and the plaintive pleading of a woman, and then a weird chorus of unearthly beings, of grotesque things that stalked along the Cornish moors and crept from behind huge boulders. Nothing but the wind was to be heard. I stood and listened to it. I could have listened for hours, for I felt in harmony with my surroundings. Lonely. The moon showed itself at intervals from behind the scudding clouds and lighted up the open landscape to my left. A gaunt hill covered with rocks, some piled up pyramidically, others strewn here and there. A few trees with naked arms tossing about and looking distressfully slim beside the more stalwart boulders. A sloping field or two, a couple of level ones crossed by a tiny path, and the lane where I stood. The scenery was desolate, not actually wild, but sad and forlorn, and the spinney by my side lent an additional weird aspect to the place, which was pleasing to me. Suddenly I heard a sound, a familiar sound enough at other times, but at this hour and in this place everything seemed different. A woman was coming along the road, a woman in a dark cloak with a basket under her arm, and the wind was blowing her skirts about her legs. I looked at the trees. One singularly gaunt and fantastic one appalled me. It had long, gnarled arms, and two of them ended in bunches of twigs like hands. Yes, they were exactly like hands. Huge, murderous-looking hands, with bony fingers. The moonlight played over and around me. I was bathed in it. I had no business to be on the earth. My proper place was in the moon. I no longer thought it. I knew it. The woman was close at hand. She stopped at a little wicket gate leading into the lane skirting the north walls of the spinney. I felt angry. What right had she to be there, interrupting my musings with the moon? The tree with the human hands appeared to agree with it. I saw anger in the movements of its branches, anger which soon blazed into fury as they gave a mighty bend towards her, as if longing to rend her in pieces. I followed the woman, and the wind howled louder and louder through those rustling leaves. How long I scrambled on, I do not know. As soon as the moonlight left me, I fell into a kind of slumber, a delicious trance, broken by nothing save the murmurings of the wind and the sighing and groaning of the winds, sweeter music I never heard. Then came a terrible change. The charm of my thoughts was broken. I awoke from my reverie. A terrific roar broke on my ears, and a perfect hurricane of rain swept through the woods. I crept cold and shivering beneath the shelter of the trees. To my surprise, a hand fell on my shoulder. It was a man, and like myself, he shivered. "Who are you?" he whispered in a strangely hoarse voice. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I replied, shaking off his grasp. "Well, tell me, for God's sake, man." He was frightened, trembling with fright. Could it be the storm, or was it those trees? I told him then and there why I had trespassed. I was fascinated. The wind and the trees had led me thither. So am I, he whispered. I am fascinated. It is a long word, but it describes my sentiments. What did the wind sound like? I told him. He was a poor common man and had no poetical ideas. The wildly romantic had never interested him. He was but an ignorant labouring man. Sounded like sighing, groaning, and so on, he asked, shifting uneasily from one foot to another. He was cold, horribly cold. Was that all? Yes, of course. Why ask? I replied. Then I laughed. This stupid, sturdy son of toil had been scared. To him the sounds had been those of his Cornish bogies, things he had dreaded in his infancy. I told him so. He didn't like to hear me make fun of him. He didn't like my laugh, and he persisted. Was that all you heard? Then I grew impatient and asked him to explain what he meant. Well, he said, I thought I heard a scream, a cry, just as if someone had jumped out on someone else and taken them unawares. Maybe it was the wind, only the wind. But it had an eerie sound. The man was nervous. The storm had frightened away whatever wits he may have possessed. Come, let's be going, I said, moving away in the direction of the wall. I wanted to find a new exit. I was tired of paths. The man kept close to me. I could hear his teeth chatter. Accidentally, I felt his hand brush against mine. His flesh was icy cold. He gave a cry as if a snake had bitten him. Then the truth flashed through me. The man was mad. His terror, his strange manner of showing it, and now this sudden shrinking from me revealed it all. He was mad. The moon and the trees had done their work. I'm not going that way, he said. Come along with me. I want to see which of the trees it was that cried. His voice was changed. He seemed suddenly to have grown stranger. There was no insanity in his tone now, but I knew the cunning of the insane, and I feared to anger him, so I acquiesced. What an idea! One of the trees had cried. Did he mean the wind? He grew sullen when I jeered at him. He led me to a little hollow in the ground, and I noticed the prints of several feet in the wet mud. Then I saw something which sent the cold blood to my heart. A woman bathed in blood lay before me. Somehow she was familiar to me. I looked again, then again. Yes, there was the dark shawl, the basket, broken it was true, with the contents scattered, but it was the same basket. It was the woman I'd seen coming down the road. My God, whatever is this? The man by my side spoke. He swayed backwards and forwards on his feet, his face white and awful in the moonlight. He was sick with terror. Oh, God, it's horrible, horrible! Then, with a sudden earnestness and a crafty look in his eyes, he bent over her. Who is it? He cried. Who is the poor wretch? I saw him peer into her face, but he didn't touch her. He dreaded the blood. Then he started back, his eyes filled with such savageness as I had never seen in any man's before. He looked a devil. He was a devil. It's my wife, he shrieked. My wife! His voice fell and turned into what sounded like a sob. It's Mary. She was coming back to St. Ives. It was her cry. There, see it, confound you. You have it on your arm, your coat. It's all over you. He raised his hand to strike me. The moonlight fell on it, a great coarse hand, and I noticed with a thrill of horror a red splash on it. It was blood. The man was a murderer. He'd killed her, and with all the cunning of the madman, was trying to throw the guilt on me. I sprang at him with a cry of despair. He kicked, hit, and tried to tear my arms from his neck, but somehow I seemed to have 10 times my usual strength. And all the while we struggled, a sea of faces waved to and fro, peering down at us from the gaunt trees above. He gave in at length, and I held him no longer with the iron grip, and help came in the shape of a policeman. The man seemed to grasp the situation easily. There had been a murder. The man whom I had secured was known to him. He was a labouring man of unsteady habits. He had been drinking, had met and quarrelled with his wife. The rest was to be seen in the ghastly heap before us. The wretch had no defence. He seemed dazed, and eyed the bloodstains on his face and clothes in a kind of stupid way. I slipped 5 shillings into the policeman's hand when we parted. He thanked me and pocketed the money. He knew his position and mine too. I was a gentleman, and a very plucky one at that. So I thought as I walked back to my rooms. Yet I lay awake and shuddered as visions of the nodding heads of trees rose before me, and from without, across the silent rows of houses, lanes and fields, there rose and fell again the wailing of a woman in distress. 2. The murder in the Spinney was an event in St. Ives. The people were unused to such tragedies, and it afforded them conversation for many weeks. The evidence against the husband was conclusive. He'd been caught red-handed, he was a habitual drunkard, and he paid the penalty for his crime in the usual manner. I left St. Ives. I had seen enough of Cornwall and thirsted for life in London once more. Yet often, at night, the sighing of the wind in the trees sounded in my ears and bid me visit them once more. One day, as I was sitting by my fire with a pile of magazines by my side, taking life easily, for I had nothing to do but kill time, my old friend Frank Wedmore looked me up. We'd been at Clifton together in the far-off 80s, and he was the only friend of the old set of whom I had lost sight. He'd not altered so much, in spite of a moustache and a fair sprinkling of white hairs. I should have known him had I met him anywhere. He was wearing a Chesterfield coat, very spruce and smart, and his face was red with healthy exercise. "How are you, old chap?" he exclaimed, shaking hands in the hearty fashion of true friendship. I winced, for he had strong hands. "Oh, fit enough," I said, "but a bit bored. But you look just the same, and fresh as a daisy." I gave him the easy chair. "Oh, I'm first rate. Plenty of work. I'm a journalist, you know, plenty of grind, but I'm taking a bit of a holiday." "You look pale. Your eyes are bad." I told him they got strained if I read much. "I dare say you'll think me mad," he went on, "but I'm going to ask you a rather curious question. I remember you used to be fond of ghosts and all sorts of queer things." I nodded. We had many such discussions in my study at school. "Well, I'm a member of the Psychical Research Society." I smiled doubtfully. "Well, you can't say they've discovered much. The name is high-sounding, but nothing beyond." "Never mind. Some day, perhaps, we shall show the public that at present it is only in the early stages of investigation." Wedmore lit a cigarette, puffed away in silence for a few seconds, and then went on. "I'm undertaking a little work for the Society now." "Where?" "In Cornwall. Ever been there?" I nodded. Wedmore was very much at his ease. "Been to St. Ives?" I knew by instinct he would mention the place. He thought I looked ill and told me I'd been overdoing it. "It's merely a case of the flu," I assured him. "I had it 6 weeks ago and still feel the effects." The woman in the hollow was before me. I saw again her shabby shawl and the blood round her throat. "There was a murder down there a short time ago." "I heard of it," I remarked casually. "It was a wife murder, I believe." "Yes, just a common wife murder. And the fellow was caught and hanged." "Then why the ghost?" "Well, that's the odd part of it," Wedmore said slowly, leaning back in his chair, his long legs stretched out. "I've heard from 2 St. Ives artists, I beg their pardon, golfists, yet screams have been heard in the Spinney about 12 o'clock at night. Not the time for practical jokers, and the Cornish are too superstitious to try their pranks in unsavoury spots. And from what I heard, the spot is singularly uncanny." "They haven't seen anything?" I asked. "No, only heard the cries, and they are so terribly realistic and appalling that no one cares to pass the place at night. Indeed, it's utterly banned. I mentioned the case to old Potters. You may have heard of him. He's the author of When the Veil is Cleared Away, and he pressed me to go down and investigate. I agreed. Then I thought I would look you up. Do you recollect your pet aversion in the way of ghosts?" I nodded. "Yes, and I still have the aversion. I think locality exercises strange influence over some minds. The peaceful meadow scenery holds no lurking horrors in its bosom, but in the lonesome moorlands, full of curiously moulded boulders, grotesque weakness must affect one there. Creatures seem to come odd and ill-defined as their surroundings. As a child, I had a peculiar horror of those tall, odd-shaped boulders with seeming faces, featureless, it's true, but sometimes strangely resembling humans and animals. I believe the spinney may be haunted by something of this nature, terrible as the trees. You know the spinney? I do, and I know the trees. Again in my ears the wind rushed, as it had on the night in question. Will you come with me? Wedmore eyed me eagerly. The same old affection he had once entertained for me was ripening in his eyes. Indeed, it had always remained there. Should I go? An irresistible impulse seized me, a morbid craving to look once more at the blood-stained hollow, to hear again the wind. I looked out of the window. The sky was cold and grey. There were rows and rows of chimneys everywhere, a sea of chimneys, an ocean of dull, uninviting smoke. I began to hate London and to long for the countless miles of blue sea and the fresh air of the woods. I assented, when better judgment would have led me to refuse. Yes, I will go. As for the ghost, it may be there, but it's not as you think. It's not the apparition of a man. It may be in part like a man, but it's one of those cursed nightmares I've always had. I shall see it, hear it shriek, and if I drop dead from fright, you, old man, will be to blame. Wedmore was an enthusiast. Psychical adventure always allured him, and he would run the risk of my weak heart and have me with him. 1,000 times I prepared to go back on my word. 1,000 tumultuous emotions of some impending disaster rushed through me. I felt on the border of an abyss, dark and hopeless. I was pushed on by invisible and unfriendly hands. I knew I must fall, knew that the black depths in front would engulf me eternally. I took the plunge. We talked over Clifton days and arranged our train to the west. Wedmore looked very boyish, I thought, as he rose to go, and stood smiling his goodbye in the doorway. He was all kindness. I liked him more than ever. I felt my heart go out to him, and yet, somehow, as we stood looking at one another, a grey shadow swept around him, and an icy pang shot through my heart. 3. It was night once more, and the moonlight poured in floods from over the summit of the knoll where the uncanny boulders lay. Every obstacle stood silhouetted against the dark background. A house with its white walls stood grim and silent. The paths running in various directions up and alongside the hill were made doubly clear in the whiteness of the beams that fell on them. There were no swift clouds, nothing to hide the brilliance of the stars, and it was nearly midnight. The air was cold, colder than is usual in St. Ives. The lights of many boats twinkled on the bay, and Godrevy stood out boldly away to the right, looking not more than a mile or so away. There were no lights to be seen in St. Ives itself. The town was absolutely still and dark. Not a voice, not a sound, not even the baying of a dog. It was very ghostly, and I shivered. Wedmore stood by my side. I glanced apprehensively at him. Why did he stand in the moonlight? What business had he there? I laughed, but I fear there was but little mirth in the sound. I wish you would stop that infernal noise, he said. I'm pretty nervous as it is. All right, I whispered. I won't do it again. But I did, and he edged sharply away from me. I looked over his head. There was the gaunt tree with the great hands. I fancied the branches were once again fingers. I told him so. For God's sake, man, keep quiet, he replied. You're enough to upset anyone's nerves. He pulled out his watch for the 100th time. It's close on the hour. I again looked at the trees and listened. Suddenly, although there had been absolute silence before, I heard a faint breathing sound, a very gentle murmur. It came from over the distant knoll, very soft and low, but gradually louder and louder, and then, as it rushed past us into the spinney beyond, I saw once more the great trees rock beneath it, and again came those voices, those of the woman and the man. Wedmore looked ill, very ill, I thought. I touched him on the arm. You're frightened, I said. You, a member of the Research Society. You afraid? Something's going to happen, he gasped. I felt it. I know it. We shall see the murder. We shall know the secret of death. What's that? Away in the distance, The tapping of shoes came through the still night air. Tap, 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 down the path from the knoll. I clutched Wedmore by the arm. You think you'll see the murder, do you? And the murderer? Wedmore didn't answer. His breath came in gasps. He looked about him like a man at bay. And the murderer? Ha! It comes from there! See, it's looking at us from those trees. It's all arms and legs. It has no human face. It will drop to the earth. And then we shall see what happens. Tap, tap, tap. The steps grew louder. Nearer and nearer they came. The great shadows from the trees stole down one by one to meet them. I looked again at Wedmore. He was fearfully expectant. So was I. A woman came tripping along the path. I knew her in an instant. There was the shabby shawl, the basket on her arm. It was the same. She approached the wicket. I looked at Wedmore. He was spellbound with fear. I touched his arm. I dragged him with me. Come, I whispered. We shall see which of us is right. You think the ghostly murderer will resemble men. It won't. Come. I dragged him forward. Had it not been for me, he would have fled. But I was firm. We passed through the gate. We followed the figure as it silently glided on. We turned to the left. The place grew very dark as the trees met overhead. I heard the trickling of water and knew we were close to the ditch. I gazed intently at the trees. When would the horror drop from them? A sickly terror laid hold of me. I turned to fly. To my surprise, Wedmore stopped me. He was all excitement. Wait, he hissed, wait! It's you who are afraid. Hark! It's 12 o'clock. And as he spoke, the clock of the parish church slowly tolled midnight. Then the end came. An awful scream rang out, so piercing and so full of terror that I felt the blood in my heart stand still. But no figure dropped from the trees. Not from the trees, but from behind the woman the form darted forward and seized her round the neck. It tore at her throat with its hands. It dragged and hurried her into the moonlight. And then, oh, damning horror! I saw its face. It was my own. The world in general laughed at the strange tale of Francis Wedmore. The madman he had let at midnight gibbering into St. Ives did not convince the sceptical readers of the London dailies with his corroboration. But the St. Ives people knew and understood. It is on account of that the Spinney so soon lost its ghosts, though the wind whistles as dismally there as ever.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
Hello, you still awake? Well, this is the bit where I was going to tell you about the virtues and benefits of becoming a Patreon. So you get ad-free stories, you get access to, I think there's 300-400 stories now, including some novel-length ones, and I'll give you a link to the stories, and you can download them, listen to you completely ad-free, do what you want with them, playing backwards, whatever you want to do. And you can get all that for $5 a month. Now that seems to be, there's that many hours that you could probably listen to nothing else for 6 months. I haven't done the mathematics on that, but you get the idea. There's a lot of them. So yeah, $5 a month, ad-free stories, and you support me and allow me to keep on doing this. So sounds good, doesn't it? So that was the Haunted Spinney by Elliott O'Donnell. Now, I say in the introduction it was published in 1904, and I believe that to be the case. But I got this copy, I got the story initially before I did my research. in the British Library Tales of the Weird book, Cornish Horrors, Tales from Land's End, edited by Joan Passy. Definitely worth buying that book if you like this kind of thing. But that says the story's from 1905. But when I did my research, it turns out that it was published in the November 1904 issue of The Idler, a British monthly magazine known for its humour and light-hearted essays. Now, I get The Idler all these years later, 101 years later, 121 years later. But, so it's not, it doesn't do these kind of stories now. Well, it might do, who knows? It doesn't, but it could do, is what I'm saying. So, I know somebody, Gary probably, is going to say, you mentioned, so that's the explanation for that. Now, you may say, why didn't I go back? Because, and the answer to that is, I give out of charitable heart, I want to actually say, well, they both might be right, mightn't they? Well, they can't be both right, can they? Have you not heard of Aristotle in the excluded middle? I believe it was Aristotle. Anyway, Elliott O'Donnell. I should say, it's Easter Sunday. Now, what are you doing this on Easter Sunday, Tony? Why aren't you spending your time off contemplating all sorts of holy things? Well, I've been out with the dogs. It's a lovely day. It's warm, and I just had this urge on me to do this when things were quiet, because the scrap man is not scrapping today. However, I do have a neighbour 3 down. His hobby is drilling. So his hobby is drilling. Whenever he gets any free time, he drills. His house, I've never been inside it. It must look like a Swiss cheese. It must be full of holes. You would have thought you'd get to the end of the places you can drill, but no. I think he's one of these guys. He's got one of those power tool hammer drills, and he's going to use it whether there's need for it or not. Anyway, so if you hear dwee, that's him. I can see on the waveform some drill marks, signs of drilling. Anyway, Elliott O'Donnell. Told you where it came from, 1904. Now, Elliott O'Donnell was an interesting guy, really. He was born in 1872 and he died in 1965, so he's not been dead 70 years, so technically this story's probably still in copyright. I just realised that after I'd done it. I thought, well, it was written 121 years ago. Come on, it can't still be in copyright. Well, maybe it isn't, but maybe it is. I think it's, you're hamstrung if you can't, because then what do? You just do kind of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I have done, and a few Sherlock Holmes stories. Anyway, so I'm taking a risk, and I'm happy to take it down if somebody objects to me using it, or even to pay a reasonable fee for licensing. This story won't make a lot of money, but that isn't why I'm doing it. But I'm prepared to pay a license fee that's reasonable as well. Anyway, so he wrote a lot of stories of so-called true ghost stories. And it says that his work is often regarded with a healthy dose of scepticism by serious researchers due to his flamboyant writing style and a penchant for dramatic, often unbelievable anecdotes. So, of course, with ghost hunting, you have the serious people like the Society for Psychical Research and old the Rhines University. And who's that guy? Dean Radin, that's the one. I read a book of his, and he's a he's an academic, but he's a researcher into parapsychology. Come out as a believer in the statistically significant power of prayer and magic and things like this. But of course, if you're a scientist and you say things like that, your reputation disappears. But that doesn't mean you're not right. It just the things you're allowed to say, without being laughed at. But that's how scientific revolutions change. Think of old Kuhn and all that guy. Anyway, let's get back to Elliott O'Donnell. He was born in Clifton near Bristol to Reverend Henry O'Donnell and Elizabeth Harrison. His father was murdered in Abyssinia, apparently, when he was quite small. Elliott O'Donnell claimed to descend from Irish Gaelic aristocracy, chieftains of clans and things. And so he had this idealised version of himself. It reminds me of old MacGregor Mathers, who was one of the chiefs of the Golden Dawn, who also, I don't think he was Scottish, but invented this persona as a clan chieftain, So it wasn't uncommon for these flamboyant Victorians to cosplay, I suppose we'd call it now. Anyway, So he went to Clifton College and later went to the Queen's Service Academy in Dublin. He wanted to join, or he thought about joining the Royal Irish Constabulary, and then he thought about joining the army. He was about to sit the exams for the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, but then he travelled a lot and he worked in the USA as a policeman. Was present during the Chicago railway strike in 1894. He came back to England. He pursued a career as a schoolmaster, but also trained as an actor at the Henry Neville School in Oxford Street. You can see the flamboyance. He married Ada O'Donnell, 1905. Now, I don't know if that was her if this can happen, was her maiden name, or it was just a coincidence. He wrote his first psychic thriller apparently in 1904, so he was relatively older at that time. So let me do my maths. 28, 36, called For Satan's Sake. He went on to write novels, mostly occult fantasy, The Sorcery Club, 1912, and then he starts producing these allegedly true ghost stories. And he was really, really popular. Stories of haunted houses, spectral figures, and he talked about his own encounters with the supernatural. And my notes with this rather polite thing on the veracity of these accounts remains questionable. Nevertheless, he became a bit of a pop authority on the paranormal, and he was invited to investigate supposed hauntings. So he went and he lectured on paranormal topics in both Britain and USA. He wrote extensively for magazines, including Weird Tales, and maintained that he believed in ghosts but was not a spiritualist, because remember that spiritualism at that time was a quasi-religion, really. And we've talked about people's belief in it, Arthur Conan Doyle and all these people. Anyway, so W.B. Yeats, etc., etc. So, people are saying that he was a celebrity ghost hunter, basically. They're not saying that that's what he was. He was a bit, and we have had them recently. I mean, I'm thinking of the late Derek Okoro, who was the star of Most Haunted. He was apparently a very well considered medium in his early days. And then, of course, Ed and Lorraine Warren in the 1970s, who were celebrity demonologists. Not a job I'd like. And they were involved in the Amityville Horror in the US, but of course the Enfield Poltergeist in London, and that was The Conjuring 2. Then, of course, the Annabelle Doll in Connecticut. And there were a whole bunch of them, Lorraine was a psychic, and Ed was a self-taught demonologist. I suppose there's not many college courses in that, so you'd have to pretty much teach yourself. Anyway, so that's the kind of guy that Elliott was, and he seems to me to be someone who had he was aware of marketing. He knew how to market. He was very poor when he was growing up, and he needed to be able to market himself, and he was a bit flamboyant, a bit theatrical. Kind of reminding him of me, really, but there we are. I don't dress up, and I don't claim. Actually, I could, claim that I'm some kind of clan leader and walk around in tartan and speaking Gaelic. And why not? Okay, he died when he was 93. He alludes to, he spices it up with stories, and he mentions in this case the Society for Psychical Research. He apparently did one night at St Nicholas Church, Brockley Combe, with Edward Fielding, an investigator for the Society for Psychical Research, but he didn't actually work for them anyway. And he wrote for Weird Tales, so he was definitely into the popular side of these things. He was 93 when he died. Let's talk about this story, The Haunted Spinney, published 1905, 1904, whichever you prefer. So it's got that true ghost thing going on, hasn't it? This is a true ghost story. And I thought one of the things, often when I'm reading these stories, certain key themes jump out at me. And particularly, when you're doing ghost stories, you can end up saying the same thing. You can end up harping on the same, and I do. But let's talk about environmental psychology. So what is environmental psychology? There's a guy called Kurt Lewin, who was a social psychologist, and this is in the 80s. He had a thing called field theory, and he even came up with a scientific equation. F, open parentheses, P, comma, E, both capitals, close parentheses, where, so B equals F. B, behaviour, equals F, which is, I don't know what F stands for. P is the personal characteristic in their environment. So me, for example, and say me and Sheila, we have different personalities, and she'd be more likely to have some psychic contact than I would. That's our personalities. And then we have the environment as well. And there was so basically what it says is, the environment, certainly, and the reason I mention this in relation to this story is that O'Donnell talks about how there are very few ghosts in pleasant meadows, but that they lurk in weird moors with twisted shapes of rocks. It's interesting that anthropomorphism, can't say it, and dark woods and bogs. And the environment clearly, and I think this is a point he's making, has a direct effect on our propensity to experience ghostly things or be frightened. And I suppose environmental psychology, and Kurt Lewin would say, yeah, absolutely, that's right, it's the environment, it's to do with the person, obviously. Some people are just not susceptible at all. They're not going to have any kind of experiences like that. But if you are a little bit that way, and they put you in an environment that has these characteristics. So what are these characteristics? Well, let's have a think about this. So, pleasant moorlands. My mind jumps, but I recently read Adam S. Leslie's book, Lost in the Garden. I've just finished, by the way, the Mexican Silvia Moreno Garcia, I think, wrote Mexican Gothic. Just finished that. Two very different books. Adam S. Leslie's book set in this eternal summer. It isn't spooky, but whereas Silvia Moreno Garcia's book is set in this House of Usher type place that's dark, it's got crypts, it's damp, So the reason I'm mentioning these is environment, because certain environments are more threatening. So that is environmental psychology. You may know of the field of evolutionary psychology. So evolutionary psychology explains current behaviours as being relics of our ancestral evolutionary past. So how so one thing I've heard said is that men are more likely to be colourblind because it was the women who gathered the berries. Men are more likely to have spatial awareness because and these are facts, more men are colourblind. Men generally have better spatial awareness. There's nothing controversial in that. It's like saying men are stronger. It's just a biological fact, or a psychological fact in that case. I don't know if it's psychological, biological, or both. So I'm not, I'm not offending anybody by that. Well, somebody will be offended because what was it? Was it Hitchens said? Some people climb up tremendously tall ladders to peer through windows so that they can be offended by something, but that is my intention. My point being, many of these explanations of environmental psychology are really persuasive and plausible, but I'm not sure that evolutionary psychology is what I mean. I'm not sure that evolutionary psychology is massively scientific. So what is science? I'm going to give you in 5 poorly constructed sentences, rather than the textbook that is 4,000 pages long, which it deserves. But it's really about empirical observation. So advancing human knowledge through empirical observation, measurement, and but there are 2 main ways that science does this, and one is through experiment. That is like the gold standard experiments. Okay, I'm going to leave those to one side. The other way is through observation. So you think of some types of science struggle to do experiments. So geology and even Darwin. Darwin wasn't an experimentalist, but and you can do kind of, I suppose, experiments, but mainly it's about taxonomy, putting things in order, and so evolutionary psychology isn't that. They're just so stories, like the berries. Well, it might be true, might not be true, might be true. How are you going to prove it? You can't. I suppose they would say they just collect evidence, and when there's a lot of the empirical evidence that shows this, and this, maybe it becomes more persuasive, and that would link in with the natural history type of scientific method, which isn't the experimental method. I mean, there may be people out there, I mean, biologists and whatever, and geologists who can do experiments, but that is my general understanding. So I like evolutionary psychology so much I'm going to cite it now. The issue about moorlands, boglands, dense forests, mountaintops being the abode of spirits and scary and numinous is because they actually pose a palpable environmental threat to human life. You can die in those places. That's why they're scarier. That's why we're more on edge. Our anxiety's up because they are more dangerous. When we're walking down by a lovely spring brook in an English woodland with the cherry blossom out like I was this morning, it's not frightening. So we're not going to see any ghosts. So the ghosts are related to our heightened anxiety. So I think that's a point he was making. I think that's right. And he makes the point, and the whole point about this haunted spinney, but he says it at the end. The ghosts then disappear. The St Ives people knew, and the ghosts then disappear from the haunted spinney once the explanation was there. So I think what he's saying what I'm saying. He's saying certain places are more liable to procure ghosts for you, but that's because of the place they are, not necessarily because they're an abode of spirits. So I think it's pretty much it's a rationalist explanation. I think the story is actually rationalist, which ties in with his idea of the Society for Psychic Research. Listen, the Society for Psychic Research isn't about debunking ghosts, not at all. It's about being scientific about it. So, and then of course that leads us to mention the stone tape theory. This is the stone tape theory, came out but Thomas Charles Lethbridge in the 1960, and that says that certain places which have had emotional energy, like a murder, imprinted on them by whatever's happened, in some sense the environment, the stones, this again is an attempt at a scientific theory, the stones of the trees or whatever are and then replay it. I don't think this is stone tape. I think this is more environmental psychology, and to the extent Elliott O'Donnell talks about how on these moorlands some of those grotesque stones, they look like people, they've got faces. Ooh, that's spooky. He talks about the trees with these branches that look like hands, and it's kind of this I've got that word again, I can't say it. Anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphistic. I'm not looking it up now. And there was research done on Mary King's Close, which is, I don't know if you know Edinburgh, the old town. There's a whole level of the city which has been built up on, so it's now underground. And Mary King's Close is a famous haunting place. Of course, there's Greyfriars Kirkyard as well. If you go to Greyfriars Kirkyard, you're surrounded by tombs and all these grinning skulls and memento mori. So this is the point about the environmental effect. I should say, jumping to the one side, both my dad and my uncle, who grew up in a house on the grass market, who backed onto the kirkyard, they talk about hauntings in the house, both of them separately at different occasions. Some years different, told me different stories about things that they'd experienced. So I'm not ruling it out, but I'm just saying, as you can see, how Greyfriars Kirkyard and Mary King's Close. Now, the reason I mentioned Mary King's Close is there were experiments done on this environmental psychology, and it was found that, it had all the tick, 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 tick that you're looking for: gloomy, dark, narrow, all these things which would have been environmental threats, which are environmental threats to people. They provoke just a tick up of your anxiety, and you're more on edge, and you're more likely to experience something. So I think Elliott O'Donnell is a rationalist, despite his theatricality, so I think he's talking about environmental psychology a long time before the 1980s and Kurt Lewin. Now, so I wanted to say that about the story. The other thing I wanted to say about the story is looking at the craft, which is related to how the story plays out. So I think we need to talk about the unreliable narrator. So what we would say about so just a quick run through the unreliable narrator, which is a literary device whereby the person who's telling you the story, in this case our unnamed man, I don't think he's named, and we have a instinctive, or we've been set up to believe that the narrator, the convention always was the narrator will tell you the truth, so you can rely on the narrator. And if he says this, then that's the way it was. This isn't like that, because it turns out that we can't rely on the narrator. So it is an unreliable narrator, and it's a literary device, and of course very famously used by Agatha Christie in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, 1926. The difference with that is, if you haven't read the book, this is going to be a spoiler, but I'm presuming, because it was written in 1926 and it's famous, that you may well have, or listen to my narration. I've just been closed down from doing Agatha Christie by copyright claims, but it doesn't mean I don't love her work. So the narrator is deliberately obfuscating, is deliberately misleading us in that case. Now, there are other examples where it's not so clear. So Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, 1938. We're not sure if we can rely on the unnamed second wife, because not because she's deliberately trying to mislead us, but because she's so emotionally off kilter because of it. So that's interesting, because it suggests that there are cases where the narrator is not reliable, not because they're deliberate malfeasance, but because they're not able, they don't know, they're not straight in their head themselves. Okay. The other one, of course, is We've Always Lived in the Castle, Shirley Jackson's 1962. And there's mental illness there, isn't there? So, and then of course, very famously, Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club, when we get to, and that is again probably mental illness, I think, as I recall the story. And that's so the story, if you remember, the Haunted Spinney, as we are presented, is our narrator is going for a walk on the moorlands. The only thing that didn't fall true for me was the fact he's wrestling this bloke in a remote woodland in Cornwall, and there's a police officer turns up to help him at the end. I'm like, really? And he gives him a bung. He gives the copper 5 shillings. Well, that's not right, is it? Anyway, does that kind of persuade the police officer? I mean, so basically, going back to the story, he's on this moor and he sees this woman. He decides to go for a walk in the woods. Why? Because he's haunted by the ghost, which is some foreshadowing, really, to his mental state, I think. And also him seeing the twisted hands of the thing is a hint, is a foreshadowing by Elliott O'Donnell that this guy's not right in the head, or at least it's not too heavy. Because if it was completely heavy-handed, or he's a schizophrenic, he's hallucinating everything, we go, we can't trust this man. But he just gives us enough that when we look back at the end, we go, that's what that was. He wasn't in a good mental state, So there's a bit of foreshadowing there, but not too heavy-handed. So I thought it was quite well done, that. I mean, in general terms, I thought his prose style was serviceable, but without being elegant. And I thought his psychological insights were, all right, but not particularly profound. So I'm not saying it's literature, but it was a fun story. And so it turns out that basically, as I reconstruct it, what was the guy, the other man, the labouring guy, doing there? Oof, who knows? Just a coincidence. And then it turns out he's murdered his wife, and he blames it on him. And then, of course, we get the class prejudice and stuff. He's an ignorant labouring man, and he likes a drink, therefore he must have done it, and he gets hanged out of sheer prejudice, because a gentleman who's giving 5 shillings to the copper couldn't possibly have done it. Oh, there's my chip hurting again. And so, and that's it, really. So what we're saying is it's an unreliable narrator due to his mental state. We need to say something about twist endings. We need to say something about Cornwall as well. I've got a bit of a Cornish obsession at the moment. I don't know if you've picked that up. I don't know how long it'll last, but I just eat pasties all the time now. I haven't had a pasty for ages, really, but I'm doing my Cornish, and funnily enough, I went to see Hawkman the other night. This is weird. Remember, I'm obsessed by Cornish. I'm learning Cornish, and I've seen Hawkman many, many times, and I stroll in, the support band's on, and they're singing, I'm sitting there and I think, they're singing in Cornish. And it gets to the end of the song and the singer goes, Muraz, which is like thank you in Cornish. I'm like, how I'm obsessed by Hawkwind, I'm obsessed by Cornish, and I've never seen a band. This was in Newcastle upon Tyne. It's the furthest you can get from Cornwall and still be in England. They're opposite ends of the country. So how come, and I've seen Hawkwind, they've never had a Cornish band on before. I've never seen anybody singing Cornish in real life, in my life. So that was weird. Where was that? But getting back to Cornwall. So there's this otherness in Gothic fiction, and Dracula famously Transylvania, Le Fanu's, I've forgotten her name, Carmilla, Carinthia. These obscure East European places are used as the other because they are little known. It's a bit like M.R. James's idea about a ghost story. You put a veil between this person. It's got to be at a distance, not too far, but at a distance. So these East European countries counted as that in that literature. And of course, the classic Gothic stuff, the Italian it's set in the continent of Europe very often, comes home a little bit later on. So it's not true for every case, but Vathek and stuff like that. But Cornwall served that purpose because it's a long way from London, and it had its language. It had until the 18th century, early 19th century potentially, and it was different. It was Celtic. It was misty. It was remote. It had this dramatic landscape, and so it had a rich folklore, and so it serves the same purpose as Transylvania. Cornwall serves the same purpose as Transylvania, as being a veil, a mystical veil. It's a place where mystical things could happen, whereas to your average reader sitting at that time in Birmingham or London, it's probably not going to happen down their street. They use the Dark is Rising trilogy, the 70s kids series used Wales and other parts of the country. So my own Cumbria has been used a bit like that as well sometimes. So it's remote, Scottish Highlands, west of Ireland, all these places. Now, interestingly, I was talking about Mexican Gothic, Silvia Moreno Garcia, and she uses England. The family in it are English, and I guess if you're in Mexico City, England probably feels as a whole quaint and odd and quirky, and it's got lots of ghosts and stone circles and haunted houses and folklore, and they've got lots of windy roads and weird people. So for the Mexicans, England serves the purpose of Transylvania, and I think that's probably for continental Europeans as well. England has that mysticalness. I mean, look at Harry Potter and Tolkien and stuff like that. It's seen as a place where you can have hobbits and magic, But for the English, in this story, Cornwall serves that purpose. So that's what I want to say about Cornwall. And I want to talk about twist endings, because there is a twist ending here. And I should have kind of linked that directly to the unreliable narrator and talked about the Cornish thing, probably at the beginning. So let's talk about twist endings. So a twist ending is a narrative technique that is frowned on by serious authors. And literary authors think if you use twist endings, you're a common genre author. But the public love them. And so it's where the story goes a certain way and turns at the end, as the ending says, a twist ending. And there are two sources of enjoyment for a reader. One is that pleasant twist at the end. Oh my goodness, I didn't see that coming. And for the clever reader, who prides themselves on their cleverness, he'll be, I saw that coming all along. And of course, classically, that they are used in detective fiction, but horror fiction and all the kind of genre fiction use them as well. But you need to foreshadow, and that's why I think he does that well with our man seeing shapes in the trees and. But you haven't got to lay it. I was saying this before. You haven't got to hammer it home, or else you lose the twist. Yeah, you can't make it obvious, but you need at the end, because if you get to the end and you reveal the twist and there's no foreshadowing, the reader goes, well, that's a swizz. because it becomes a deus ex machina, which is another literary thing which you mustn't do. You mustn't do it. Although people do it. The Greeks used to do it, of course. The god from the machine, that's where it comes from Greek theatre. The story would be like completely knotted, no solution, and a god appears, and there we are, sorts it all out. That's a deus ex machina. Listeners, readers don't like that. Modern ones don't. Greeks maybe did. So what kind of twists are there? Well, the unreliable narrator, which we've talked about. You think about Gone Girl, by Gillian Flynn, 2012. The diary entries mislead the reader. So the unreliable narrator can be a deliberate misleader or can be misleading because of their mental state. And there are other, just running through the different kinds of twists, there are 5, 6. So there's unreliable narrator, reversal of identity, and this is very common in Gothic fiction from the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, whereby somebody who is supposed to be somebody turns out not to be them. So somebody who's living may be dead, somebody who's dead may be living, a hero may be a villain, a victim may be the perpetrator, and that's all achieved through misdirection. In this case, we do have that. We have the perpetrator is probably our narrator. So the reversal of identity in a sense. Reversal of motive, I don't think we have that. Reversal of perception, the classic one is the Planet of the Apes, 1968, where everything's going along and then we think we're on an alien planet and then suddenly we see the Statue of Liberty and oh my goodness. And then of course Lost as well was always doing things like that. Reversal of achievement, we haven't got that there. Great example of this is The Gift of the Magi. I've done that on the Classic Stories podcast. And peripeteia, a term from classical tragedy referring to a reversal of fortune, must arise logically from preceding events and is most powerful when it casts earlier actions in a new light. So that is also a reversal of perception. Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, 1884, exemplifies this with the final revelation that reshapes the entire story. So what I would say is there's lots to be said about this story, as always. It is neatly done. And it is a twist-ending story with an unreliable narrator and a reversal of motive with a what is a supernatural element? When they go back, they see the thing happening again. So that is the ghostly bit of it. I think without that, it wouldn't work. So it isn't necessarily a supernatural story. But otherwise, it's not a bad piece of work. As I say, his prose is not fantastic, but it does the job. I hope you like that. There's lots to say, always lots to say, and probably we could spend the whole day talking about these kind of stories, but we're not going to do that.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?